The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents, Would Atheism Fix the Middle East? Yes. No. No, it wouldn't. I saw a meme where someone was saying, oh, I know there's nothing that would fix the Middle East. And somebody goes, atheism would. I'm not a historian. I'm going to give you a quick summary and not claim any expertise here. This is just my thoughts. But Israel didn't exist, essentially, in the modern era before 1948. And Jews and Muslims both have a religious and a cultural tie to that region. Christians don't have the same tie to it, but I don't want to go through this and not mention that Christian apocalyptic ideas are important to how other nations have interacted with and treated both the Jewish and Palestinian people. If your religion believes that a war in the Middle East is coming and is a sign of God's return, that is pouring gasoline on the conflict. In many cases, people are genuinely trying to hasten that. I have people, like family members, whose particular view of Christianity is such that they're going to vote in a few days based in part on what they want to happen in the Middle East. And it's not peace that they're looking for. And so the perception is, because there's this Christian apocalyptic view, and because of the mess that was created, which I'll go through a little bit, by nations running this area from a Christian perspective, the perception of a lot of atheists is this is a religious problem. God promised the Jews this land, and God or some other God or whatever seems to promise the Arabs this land, or this was our land and you took it away and gave it to somebody else, based primarily on religious reasons. So the quick rundown is that while Jews and Muslims have both religious and cultural ties to the region, Christians really don't have anything other than a religious tie to the region. But this area that includes Israel and West Bank and Gaza is all part of what used to be known, or at least biblically known, as Canaan. Saul established the Jewish monarchy, and then you have the first Jewish temple being built in Jerusalem. But the region was called Palestine by the Ottomans and many others that had control over the region at various times. In the 1880s, Jews started migrating back to that region after the diaspora, the spreading out of Jews from conquest. So they had ties to that region originally. They spread out after conquest, and around the 1880s or so, they started migrating back. By the way, if any of my dates or information are wrong, please make a comment down below, but also go check actual historians and stuff. I'm pulling this up to just kind of summarize some aspects of it. In 1920, Great Britain took over from the Ottoman Empire, and in 1922, the League of Nations approved a British plan, or British promise, I guess, for the establishment in Palestine. So right there, it's being called Palestine. Doesn't matter whether or not it was a state. Doesn't matter whether this is the label. People are like, oh, there was no Palestine ever. This is the label for it. But the League of Nations approved the British promise of the establishment of within Palestine, a national home for the Jewish people. So right there in the plan, they're acknowledging this region, which is called Palestine by the Ottomans and bunches of others, we're going to establish a national home for the Jewish people. That was 1922. In World War II, 1939 to 1945, there were 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. And in 1947, the UN came up with a partition plan, a two-state solution, allowing part of that region to be Israel and part of that region to be Palestine. Israel favored the plan. Of course they did. They were trying to come back to their ancestral home. And while they wanted all of it, they had none of it. And so getting some of it is acceptable and preferable to getting none of it. Problem is that many Arabs felt that the plan unfairly favored the Jews. An interesting thing is that there's not a lot of religious discussion or religious attempts at justification for the plan, apart from the religious identity. Apart from they're Jews, we're Muslims, we have different views on things. But both felt that they had a right to this, not just for religious reasons, but for cultural reasons as well. So in 1948, the State of Israel was founded, and the Arab League attacked pretty much immediately, rejecting it. Egypt took over Gaza, and Jordan took over the West Bank, and the plans for a two-state solution were scrapped. And many people who are desperately trying to solve and work towards peace in the Middle East are like, why can't we just go back to the 1947 plan? Yeah, because that one was unacceptable to some people then, and it seems that it's unacceptable now. The possibilities for diplomatic solutions are few and far between. And this has gone on for so long that it has become beyond mere religious proclamations about what God wants for that land, especially when you consider that somewhere near half of Jews in Israel are secular. Doesn't mean they're atheist, but secular. But about 720,000 Arabs fled or were expelled. And that period, it's interesting to note when they say history is written by the victors, that period in Hebrew is referred to as the War of Independence. And in Arabic, it's referred to as the catastrophe. There's similar differences in how events are described by those who won and those who lost, or those who benefited and those who lost, in many other areas. And we could spend a great deal of time talking about this and about what potential solutions still remain. Why are we fighting over a scrap of land that is small and seemingly worthless? Is it just religion? I don't mean worthless in the literal sense. I mean, there are much more resource rich areas. Once upon a time, when we were fighting wars of conquest, when you got conquered, that was it until you reconquered. But if we're going to try and avoid this chain of wars of conquest, then we can't just keep taking over and moving people somewhere else because we're running out of places to move people. Although one could argue we've almost completely run out of places to move people. Conversations surrounding this change because of that transition. We now have the United Nations and NATO. We have treaties that are new and modern and really oppose imperialistic wars of conquest. And it's no longer good enough to say, ooh, you took over this land from us. No, we didn't. Our ancestors did. And so we're not going to rehash this. It would be absurd to think, let's give all the land back to whatever group has the strongest originalist claim to it. That doesn't make sense for the world either. Doesn't mean it's remotely fair. At some point, you just have to draw a line in the sand and say, this is the way it is moving forward, and here's the procedures that we're going to use for addressing these issues. And then there are still going to be people who are not going to be willing to accept that. Anyone saying this is all about religion is both wrong and right, in the sense that while the origins tie to at least strong religious associations with a region, it's become so much more than that. This isn't about Judaism versus Islam. What started as religion is now being fueled by religions, including religions outside of the one involved, and has now become its own monster. A separate religion-ish view of us versus them, and a desperate flailing to keep this region, a desperate flailing to keep or regain one's home. In reality, in addition to perception, atheism has nothing and is nothing that could fix any of this. Yes, yes. If they stopped believing in a God, then of course they'll stop believing that God has granted them this land, something that groups on many sides believe. But they'll still culturally think that they belong to that region. It is a connection to the past and the identity that lingers irrespective of how it originated. It is my father's 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 home. Damn it, it should be my home too. Now, I'm a little weird. I am not particularly nostalgic. Apart from saying, hey, one of my ancestors founded one of the first 3 churches that became the Southern Baptist Convention. And I know that my ancestors were Huguenots, religious Huguenots escaping religious persecution. And they moved from France to Ireland, and then Ireland to the United States. And I know members of my family that, lived in different regions, and I have ties to, some Appalachian stuff and a lot of Ozark stuff. And I could regale you with notes of family members that ran moonshine and all this. It's a curious thing for me, but I genuinely am not nostalgic. I don't care what my ancestors did or didn't do. I don't care about my ancestral homes. I don't care about the ethnic identity or cultural identity of my ancestors. I'm me, not them, and them includes my ancestors. I have family recipes, but if you want them, I'll give them to you. It's not appropriation for somebody to get my family's recipes. I don't even know that for all I know, my family got them from a Betty Crocker cookbook, changed something about them and said, oh, this is the Dillahunty, or the Brown family, blah, blah, blah. I don't feel that connection to the past, and my ancestors are the way other people do. But I recognize I'm in the minority, and so I intentionally curb my own preferences on this and recognize that other people have strong feelings and strong ties to their ancestors, their cultural identity, their regional identity. And me not agreeing with them isn't going to change that. And atheism isn't going to fix that. And it may be something that doesn't need to be fixed. Maybe it's perfectly fine and normal to have strong ties to one's cultural and ancestry. Maybe I am the really odd one, and that's fine, because I don't think there's a right answer here, which is why I also don't think that there's necessarily a wrong answer about how strongly you feel about those things, unless you feel so strongly about it that you're willing to kill people. And that's where I think these views of what is and should be cherished and what I should and shouldn't connect with and what somebody else should and shouldn't connect with lead to problems. Atheism isn't a fix for that. Atheism isn't an ideology. It is merely the rejection of God claims. But you know what might fix it? Humanism. Not entirely. I'm doing a video on humanism a little later, but in a nutshell, humanism isn't just atheism or secularism. It is a complex package of views that attempts to erode the us versus them distinctions and mentalities that currently exist and replaces them with an ideal of human unity that, frankly, is a different version of us versus them and could be us humans versus whoever tries to invade us. But basically, it's about us putting human life on even footing. And the only thing in conflict with that are those people who want to subdivide humans into groups with different base starting values. In fact, that new us versus them that might be humanism versus them isn't the doing or isn't caused by secular humanism. It's merely the rejection of secular humanism. Secular humanism is an attempt to eliminate many of the biases and divisions that religions and religious ideologies have reinforced to the detriment of us all. Secular humanism has a notion that an Israeli life and a Palestinian life start on equal footing. And then as individuals, we evaluate their actions, the consequences of those actions with respect to the rights, freedoms, and health and welfare of all. That I get to value me and my own above someone else when deciding how to make use of my resources. But I don't get to value myself and my family as above everybody else when deciding how to use their resources, or if their resources should be even available or shared for our use. Atheism cannot fix anything. It's not even going to fix concepts that are wrong beyond, I don't have a good reason to believe in a God, or I'm not convinced that a God exists, or religions haven't met their burden of proof, because you can be an atheist and believe almost anything else other than there is a God. So no, as much as it might be nice, and it's probably not going to happen anyway, atheism can't fix the Middle East, but humanism might be critical to doing so. And it's one of the reasons why I think humanitarian efforts led by secular organizations with primarily humanist values, even if they're not vocally saying, yay, go secular humanism, but why those organizations may be one of the best ways to push back against religious isolationism, religious privilege, and the religious catastrophes that are rooted in the idea that my group and your group are fundamentally different in how God prefers them, what God wants for them, and what we deserve culturally because of our past. Humanism isn't a cure-all, but it could go a long way towards minimizing individuals' willingness to kill and conquer for their perception of their group. See you next time. Take care.